Good morning, good afternoon. We have the pleasure and the honor to have with us the Professor Richard Banks, who has been um, very kind to accept our invitation to talk about implementation science. We know how difficult it is nowadays to understand what science is going on, but it's more difficult to understand why science, once science has discoveries or new um, innovations, is why it's not going to be happen. Is still in a drawer or is still in documents. And the challenge is to see how all this effort from economy and time and dedication is not easy to pass to make things happen. And that's the main subject today with Professor Richard, is to have that, how he sees that from the practical way, from the University of Illinois, Chicago, and from the long experience in uh, surgery, mostly about as an anesthetist, and as a person who had working a lot about processes and about innovation in healthcare. We are pleased to have you here, and whenever you want, you can start to talk. I have to say that this event is organized by InnoHealth Academy. We are as International Association on Innovation, and when gathering more than 100 people from different fields in order to accelerate the innovation in our health services, in hospitals, in social care, and to in mental health care. And we think it's very important to know from the perspective from him how we can improve, how we can make possible to have the science in the practical way in the benefit finally of the patient. Thank you very much, Richard. And when the floor is yours.
Juan, thank you very much for inviting me. Members of the InnoHealth Academy, again, thanks for inviting me to speak about this topic that I feel very passionate about. The topic for today is implementation science, specifically how to go from the no to the do, what is being called the closing the no to do gap. Um, let me, so the first thing I would like to do is talk a little bit about the problem. Evidence-based practice is a process that basically incorporates into clinical practice, but not only into clinical practice, in any other practice, the best available research, clinical knowledge, and preferences into that practice of that particular subspecialty. As any evidence practice practitioner will tell you, evidence-based practice is a change in the clinical practice. And as you well know, whether this is clinical practice or any other specialty, change is always a problem. And obviously, it is difficult to achieve. The problem with evidence-based practice is that literature shows that 50% of the EBPs only reach widespread clinical usage. In addition, we have seen in the last 30 to 40 years that it takes on average 17 years for the EBP to make it into the general practice. That actually is terrible. That actually shows how difficult it is to implement new practices in what is an established practice in any other domain. The problem with EBL is that usually, specifically talking about healthcare, those best practices have been derived from academic medical centers in very specific population and through well-controlled clinical trials. In addition, we see that the EBP is often has specific characteristics and that they're very difficult to incorporate when they mean a change in a clinician's routine. And this is the same whether you're talking about clinical care or any other subspecialty. When we talk about the problems with implementation strategies, we see that most of the effort to implement EBPs, to implement a practice, for that matter, to implement any change, is that we usually use single interventions. That is a single method or technique to facilitate the change. And that the reality is that most of the ways to scale up an evidence-based practice actually need a specific implementation strategy that is integrated not just by one single action, by a bundle or package of discrete actions. So what is implementation science? Implementation science has been defined as a scientific study of all the methods to promote the uptake of an EBL, that is, an uptake of a best practice in order to achieve an improvement in the healthcare quality and services that we provide. When did it appear? Well, the first recorded conversations about implementation science appear in 1962 with what you all know that is the Everett Rogers diffusion of innovation theory. And that is when this specific scientific research started appearing in multiple publications. There are obviously other definitions of implementation science. One of them is a science that allows you to bridge the know-do gap. That is, what we know versus what we're actually doing. And this is important to specifically find the contextual factors, that is the barriers or the facilitators that allow you the uptake of the evidence-based practice into generalized practice. Another definition, similar to what I just said, is that the implementation science is a scientific method that allows you to identify all those factors, and here's the key word, that predict the likelihood that a specific change will take place, and obviously the strategies for successful implementation. This is a very curious definition by Current and co-workers on what implementation science is actually is. They call it the best practice, or what you want, or the change that you want is referred as the thing. The effectiveness of research is not actually the implementation, but looks at how well the thing works. And the implementation research looks at what can we do, or how to best help the people or the places to do the thing, being the strategies, what we have to do to make it happen. So in other words, implementation science and its strategies are the techniques and the scientific approach to make a change take root and upscale it. Implementation science is different from other sciences in that there's very specific characteristics of one and the other. While implementation science and the traditional quality improvement science complement one another, there are specific differences. Quality improvement basically looks at a problem in a single healthcare institution, while implementation science is trying to take a research and evidence-based practice that is underutilized across all healthcare and tries to implement it. The goal of QI is to specifically fix the problem, while the goal of implementation science is to generalize the diffusion and the use of the EBL. The approach is similar. There's designs and trial strategies, and of course, the models, the methodologies are quite different. The truth is that quality improvement cannot happen without a secondary outcome. That is, the first outcome is for quality improvement to try to find the solution to the problem that exists. And that goes through solution design, development, testing, and delivering it. But the second outcome, which is important, and here is where implementation science helps, is the solution to be embraced. I always say that a quality improvement solution without the actual deployment and usage of it is completely useless. So the second outcome is the adoption of the particular solution. And within the adoption, one can measure the changes in attitudes and behaviors, and obviously in day-to-day activities. We also shouldn't confuse implementation science with diffusion and dissemination. Diffusion, for example, for Everett Rogers, is the passive uptake of a particular change. Dissemination is an active spread with a particular strategy, but in general refers to education as the core of the strategies that we do to implement the change. And implementation is actually the usage of a new practice within a specific setting. I do like this this particular graph because there's very often confusions between the different stages of translational research. Translational research tries to take what we know in theory and through research and apply it to whatever subspecialty we're considering. And as you can see, the practice of interest, which we call here POI at the beginning, right here, has a first stage, which is the efficacy. And the efficacy is how does that change perform under ideal conditions, followed by a study of effectiveness, which is how does this particular change conform under real world conditions. And finally, last but not least, is the study of implementation science. That is, what are the factors that are going to predict, and therefore what strategies can we use to make sure that whatever we've discovered, this practice of interest, can be applied, can be used, and could be upscaled. There has been, as of late, a number of theories, models, and frameworks to use in implementation science. The truth is that it's quite complex, and I think that the novelty of implementation science is reflected in the fact that there's a lot of theories and models. When that happens, usually it's because, well, we don't have clarity yet on what is best. And here are some of the theories, models, and frameworks that have been used. I'm not going to go through all of them, of course. Some of them are just to describe the research that is used in terms of defining what models are best. Other frameworks are used to understand what influences the implementation. And last but not least, some of the models are used to evaluate the results of the implementation. And I'm going to speak specifically about the classic theories and the determinant frameworks. You all know classic theories because the classic theories are usually taken from other fields external to implementation science, such as psychology, sociology, and organizational theories, which are applied to understanding and devising strategies on how we can implement a change. Obviously, the most common one has been, of the classic theories, has been Everett Rogers. Everett Rogers explained how a particular change diffuses through a social system, and he considers 5 factors: the innovation, decision, and cost-benefit analysis that people do, the specific characteristics of the adopters, what are the communication channels, the time, and the social system. As you can see, the theory is already expanding a little bit more and trying to look at other factors that might influence the adoption of a specific change. Look, since the early 1940s, there's been a ton of change management models and theories and approaches, from the ones that consider the 3 states, from the ones that describe what are the emotional components and the changes that people undergo in order to, and of course, from each one of them, you can derive the appropriate strategies. And specifically during the processes, LaMarche, Coder, and Prossi are some of the most, of the latest ones and some of the most used. Kurt Lewin spoke about unfreeze, change, and refreeze, and specific strategies to try and implement changes into whatever area you want to. And Salerno described a mixture of stages and specific changes that the individual goes through, and she describes specific strategies to transition individuals from their specific positionings and try to get them to stage 5, which is understanding and integration. More of those classic theories is John Fisher, who described both the process of transition, that is what people do in order to adapt to change, and what happens when you either err or you deviate from one of those pathways. And he compared that to the transitional events in an organization and devised a number of strategies to push people through changes. And LaMarche defined a number of stages and a number of activities that needed to be done in order to access the change. And I think that one of the most important ones in terms of change management directed towards the process is the 8-step change model of Kotter that, of course, we've all talked about and we've all practiced and we've all deployed in organizations to try and achieve change. I should say that most of these theories had some successes and also have some limitations. And I think that we could all get examples of areas where they've been successful, but I think that they have some shortcomings that I will address as we move on to the implementation sciences. As of late, a number of new models have appeared based on a better understanding of neurosciences, particularly this one with Hilary Scarlett. She talks about a central organizing principle that basically our brains are in between minimizing threats and maximizing rewards. And anything that is a threat, there is an activation of the central nervous system towards fight or flight response, what they call the amygdala hijack, because it basically takes place in one of the central nucleus of the brain called the amygdala. And anytime that there's a response towards rewards, she calls it engagement. And so what she says is that to avoid threats, we need to predict in order to pattern recognition. And when change appears, since we can't really predict the effects of that change in a number of social determinants, in a number of our aspects of our own professional and personal life, since we don't have this recognition, pattern of recognition and ability to predict, the response of our brain is towards fight or flight, which expresses itself as a rejection of the change. Other neurosciences, other neuroscientific models have appeared based on a better understanding of some of the social factors and how social behavior is driven. In this particular theory from David Rock called the SCARF, he talks about the fact that all human interaction is driven by 6 social behavior determinants: purpose, status, connected, identity, autonomy, and fairness. And so what he basically says is that when something is proposed, a change in this case, that is perceived as a loss of this particular 6 items, we feel that we want to avoid this. And when any circumstance is perceived as a gain in one of those 6 drivers of social behavior, is when we accept it. So in essence, the theory of change, according to David Rock, says that in order to make change possible, we need to make sure that we preserve purpose, that is, asking people to have a particular drive and to accept what is going to happen, to maintain identity, status, and connection by making sure that people are part of the team that designs the change, by making sure that people are part of the leadership, that their opinion matters, et cetera, and the same with autonomy and fairness. Again, most of these theories or models of change have been partially successful, but they've encountered some of the problems. Some of the hybrid models is the theory of Prosy and Atkar, which basically considers 5 building blocks that everybody goes through when they change. They also consider that any change requires 5 types of activities: communication, sponsorship, coaching, training, and resistance management, and that they all have to be integrated in 7 strategies in order to basically, at different times, as people go through the different stages, you have to do very specific activities to foster the change within 3 phases. The PROCYATCAR model is a little complicated, and frankly, I think that it is a great theoretical model, but the practicality of its application, I think, is low. So what is happening with implementation science and the determining frameworks? These frameworks say that any change is affected by specific determinants that have a specific impact on outcomes. And obviously, there are barriers to implementation, and they're facilitators of implementation. And basically, the determinant frameworks try to achieve or to find which ones they are. And once you understand them, they are used to provide a strategy to focus on the specific components, and not only to focus, but to establish a hypothesis, a prediction on how they're going to work, and to make changes as you unfold the change. And they're also used to, once a change has been deployed and whether it's been successful, and then you can use it as a model, or it has failed, that you can explain the variation through those specific frameworks. I want to explain a little bit the case, very famous case in the United States, of the Veterans Administration Hospitals, the VA, who in the early 90s found themselves in some trouble. As you know, this is unique to this country. VA hospitals provide care to veterans of wars, and they basically provide care and provide surgical services and any other healthcare service to people that have been either deployed in different wars, male, female, and in any area of the armed forces. There are a large number of VA hospitals distributed through our geography. And I would say that in the early 1990s, there were several problems with quality, with safety, with the possibility of access, with problems with the lack of communication between centers. And in 1998, through a mandate through Congress, a quality improvement endeavor was undertaken called the Quality Enhancement Research Initiative, the QUERI, to basically try and implement a number of evidence-based clinical practice into the VAs. The goal was to optimize care, and not only to optimize care, but to accelerate the adoption of EBPs, the evidence-based practices, into the practices of the VA. Because of this, a number of researchers at the time, specifically Laura Darmschroeder and colleagues, created or studied and then created a framework to understand how one could implement in a large healthcare center, and for that matter, in any other organization, improvements. That is, the EBPs, the evidence-based protocols or the evidence-based practices. What she did is that, based on 19 previous empirical findings and a number of research, created a framework to categorize, study, and devise strategies on contextual factors that affect the implementation effectiveness. Here is her model. And as you can see, her model is composed of factors that are in the outer setting, factors that are in the inner setting or in the specific organization, factors that are related to the individuals, factors that are related to what is it that you try to implement, and finally, how are you going about the implementation process. This framework, which has now been utilized in a large number of implementation efforts throughout hospitals, throughout other organizations, has 5 domains. As we said it, innovation, outer, inner setting, individual, and implementation process. And each domain has about a total of 39 factors, what she called constructs, which are known to impair or favor implementation. Those are considered influential moderators and factors that facilitate the application of any change. And they're also used to systematically assess, well, the context where you're trying to make the change. I gave you this reference at the bottom of the page. Obviously, this is just the first part, the first innovation domain, but she has a number of constructs. Each construct has a number of questions and tools that you need to use to answer these questions in order for you to better understand, prepare, and devise the strategy for change. As you can see, it's been implemented in a large number of settings: healthcare, public health, education, agriculture, banking, and others, either to guide data collection, to guide data analysis, and or to design implementation strategies. That is, instead of using the traditional models to think about what am I going to do to implement a change, to use the consolidated framework as a tool to design a strategy to implement a change. Because of her work and because of other research, there has been a growing interest in the United States to find implementation strategies, understanding that the traditional models are not sufficient. And there's been recently a panel called the Expert Recommendation for Implementation Change, or ERIC, a panel of experts that have devised 73 specific areas that need to be targeted when you implement a change. Of course, those are changes on a large scale in large organizations. And I also gave you the reference. So I would say that in conclusion, this was just an introduction to implementation science. I think that there are numerous evidence-based practices that could be used to improve the quality and safety of care and or the functioning and the processes in multiple organizations. However, we know that because of the resistance to change and because of social and contextual factors, implementing evidence-based practice is difficult, is lengthy, and requires a number of efforts. And we know that the classic models and strategies to implement these practices have been, in general, have had mixed results. Some have been very effective, but in general, they've had mixed results. And I think that now there's a new wave, both in healthcare and other specialties, to consider, to put together all the science behind change, both from the psychological aspect, from the organizational aspect, operational aspect, and put it together as a scientific body of evidence, the science of implementation, to basically try and be more successful when one tries to implement a change. For example, a change in the healthcare patterns of hospitals in a particular region. One of the models is this Consolidated Framework for Implementation Research, SFIR, and or the recommendations that come from ERIC. And I think that those recommendations, if you look at them, study them, and look at how they've been deployed, can significantly contribute to the success of implementation changes in clinical practice and in other areas. Thank you very much. I hope that this was just an introduction to the subject, and I hope that with my presentation, I can elicit more interest in implementation science.
Thank you very much, Professor Banks. I think it has been impressive to have all this research in the history of innovation and evidence-based practices. I think it's one question. I have questions myself, but I don't know if some attendants can make any question. But to start with, a question I have in my mind following your talk is why it's so difficult to transfer the experiences from one organization, a hospital, let's say, to another hospital, because looks like silos, no? And everybody has to pass the different difficulties or to have the challenges. But it's not easy, I think, to see how this experience to make a change in a sector, or in a service, or in a hospital, how would you think can be transferred to other organizations? What do you think?
Well, I think that any change requires an understanding of both the particular circumstances of the people where the change is imposed. And this is where we focus a lot of attention. But I think that we also have to focus our attention on the factors that surround those individuals. Because as we can see, the changes that we try to implement sometimes need modification. But individuals are not just submitted to their own biases for change. Very often individuals are submitted to the factors in the environment, such as the culture of the organization, such as the specific requirements, equipment of the organization, external pressures, regulatory agencies, and how the change and the process of change has been implemented. So I think that one of the great assets of implementation science is that it has a very broad approach to everything that is needed to actually make a change happen. And I think that if you look at the different theories, it seems like they've all had success, but they only address a specific area of what I would call the systems of change. That is, you have to have a broader perspective of everything that goes into implementing a change, especially when it's a large-scale change.
Good. Thank you very much, Professor. Some other questions? Some other can be in Spanish. Dr. Roca.
Yes.
Hi. So thank you a lot. I like it a lot, the presentation. And
Yep.
I believe that the last, the option taken by the Veterans Administration, the CEFIR, it's a very good option that we have tried to use both at local level, but also in large European projects. And the way that I see, and I'm not an expert at all in this field, but the way that I see is that conceptually is very strong, but still is a bit complex to use it, or let's say in a pragmatic way on regular life to assess implementation of innovative service, something like this. My question is regarding if you feel that this tool is evolving towards, let's say, more quantitative evaluation of the different constructs and towards a simplification. What's your view about how is evolving the CEFIR?
I think that CEFIR obviously is a tool that was created by researchers, and it provides a framework, a model. I just recently saw an application of CEFIR in clinical, in a real scenario. And of course, what the authors did is take the overall understanding, design specific strategies, and design those strategies according to the environment where they were. What I'm trying to say is that even if you have 5 domains and 37 subsections, that you have to understand that this is a tool that was created by researchers, and that you have to adapt them to the circumstance. I think of it like a list. Meaning you can go down the list and say, is this important for this organization? Is this important for this organization? And when you find something that is important, it's like a reminder, right, of a checklist of everything that you should have thought about when you try to implement a change. Frankly, most of the changes don't even have a model. It's just somebody deciding, a small group, that this is what needs to be done. And the next thing that you know is that they make a PowerPoint presentation, very eloquent, and say, on Monday morning, we're starting. So I think that there's a gap between what we do, right, and this very complex world. I think that we should be in the middle. But I think that the CEFIR provides at least a checklist of things that you should think about at least.
Thank you. I fully agree with you. Yeah, thanks.
It's interesting that a number of centers throughout the United States are starting to understand that that we need to implement this particular changes. There is a thrust for improving the quality and the safety of care, and I think that a lot of the changes that have been pushed into healthcare have not been absolutely successful. Some of them have had a short life, and there is a thinking that that we need to do a little bit better. That some of the forces in the industry and some of the changes in the industry are driven by economical factors. So basically, you change or you die. But that has not been the case in healthcare, because, well, even if you don't make changes, the hospital is not going to disappear. And I think that perhaps the comparisons of what has been achieved in companies and in the industry, especially in manufacturing, cannot really be used or have not been successful in healthcare. And I think that we need to think about it in different ways. Look, practices in hospitals are very entrenched. Making changes are very difficult, and certain specialties even more than others. Surgery has the tendency to evolve because those changes, those innovations are seen positively, but other areas, very difficult. And so I think that we need some model that we kind of refer to implement those changes, especially when they're broad in big organizations.
If I may,
Joan?
yeah, I believe that when we report on, let's say, the deployment of a complex intervention, it's nice to report in terms of facilitating the compatibility between sites, to report not only the outcomes and the protocol, but also the way this has been implemented or adopted. So it would be nice to have a, let's say, sort of a standardized way to describe the key components of the CEFIR in order to report properly the whole process. Would you agree on this?
Yeah, I agree. And turn it around now, not only to report, but if you have made a change in a particular organization and you've been successful, it would be interesting to have a fixed template that I can evaluate on which areas you were successful and which areas were deployed and not deployed. And obviously each organization is going to have some variation, but that has been the problem too, a lack of consistency in the way that we've expressed what we did. And I think that that tool provides this consistency. And I know it's a complex tool, but I think that it could be tailored to specific needs, right? So when you go to an organization, you can say, okay, in those 5 dimensions, we targeted this, 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 and this, and we did this, this, and this under these headings.
One last question, perhaps not to bother you. What do you think about the role of the leadership of the changes? Because we talk about models, about processes, about different methodology. What do you think about the weight and the importance of the leadership when we are talking about implementing science?
You mean implementing science within change, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think that the role of the leader is crucial. The first thing that the leader does is legitimize the change. Basically, if the leader doesn't legitimize the change, I think that the front line in general feels like, here it is, another theory from somebody else. So, right, it loses importance. The effects of the leader also is to what we call open doors. And what I mean by open doors is, well, gather what is needed, gather the resources, maybe change some of the roles of people so that they can attend to the change. And I think that changes without a champion. And obviously, the question is to make sure that the champion is the appropriate champion, the person that has relevance, a person that has connections, a person that has the control of some of the processes and can lead the organization towards some of the changes. So it's obviously fundamental. And whether that role is taken on by the leader in the organization or by the leader of a consulting company, but there has to be a face behind the change. And last but not least, the leader also has to explain, specifically clarifying anything that is not clear, because as you well know, people that when change is deployed, when people don't have clear idea of what's going to change, they start getting worried, they start getting confused, they may be pushed back on the change. The leader has to clarify what's going to change, what's not going to change, and provide some form of control of what otherwise would appear circumstances that are under no control.
Okay, I think that I agree with you. That's a good answer for us. Anyway, no more questions. Perhaps we can close this webinar. You agree? And thank you very much, Professor Banks.
Pleasure.
And I think we have a master class, and we were happy to know you, how you're doing, and how you can making things happen, because I know you are very active and very proactive, and you know a lot about how to change, how to implement things. Thank you very much, and I hope to have another time to talk about these subjects or other subjects you know very well, to enlighten us and to make it possible to transfer your knowledge to our organization, InnoHealth Academy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me, and have a great day. Have a great afternoon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.